Everybody, welcome to Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook, and today episode, I guess we can say, on the virtual bench here, because guess what? I'm not actually on the tech bench today talking about technical items. I am actually out in the field, and I have a great opportunity that I'm able to do here today, which is to be at a place. It's a new tower site that's going online. So there's going to be some things that we talk about today, like, those wires are kind of there. Well, guess what? This tower site is going online, and it's starting to get things there. So there is some work in progress, but I talked to the owners, I talked to the people whose equipment is there and everything, and they said, John, come on in. If you want to help educate your viewers, that's what we want to go ahead and do. So guess what? That's where today's episode is at. It's virtually on the tech bench for Communications and Cigars. So, because we got a lot to talk about, we're not going to talk too much about cigars, but I will tell you this. I want to thank everybody that was down there at Hamcation, that went along and stopped and saw me out there and said, hey, glad to meet you, glad to see you first time, face-to-face, actually, saw some of the screen names to the actual people, and I appreciate it, as well as thank you to the few that have dropped off cigars. You guys know that I love cigars, and I really enjoy them. So, on behalf of myself and the Communications and Cigars channel, thank you very much for going ahead and providing me with those delicious and great cigars. As of course, guess what? Part of the way that we can make Communications and Cigars happen to take place is with the help of the funding from JJK Communications. That's right, JJK Communications helps us with the sponsorship of this channel, as well as being able to work with some sites to be able to get in and do feature sets and stuff like this. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever done this kind of interesting kind of thing, but I thought it'd be really great because over the last few episodes, we've actually gone ahead and talked about what is a repeater, how does a repeater work, anatomy of a repeater and everything like that, and I thought today would be a great day to do this. So, we're recording this, obviously, pre-recorded episode, because I'm not going to be able to actually broadcast from the tower site location here live, so that's why this episode is recorded. So, let's take a look at some of the things that we have here in the shack. So, first of all, the first and most important thing is obviously we need repeaters. So, I have a couple different repeaters that are actually working here and are showing here. We're not going to go ahead and tell the name of anything on there. I did ask, part of today's episode was that, hey, John, can you not go ahead and say what agency this is for, what business is for, and stuff like that, and that's fine, that's understanding on it. We don't want to upset anybody. It's very nice. There's people behind the camera that you actually can't see right now that are actually still on site to make sure that I don't give away any sort of information like that. So first of all, let's talk once again about repeaters. So this is your standard rack. Lots of different repeater sites and locations and tower sites have rack and rack space. And if you are ever going to get into the business world or public safety world or whatever, amateur repeater, GMRs, wherever might require a repeater or base station, guess what? This is going to be where the premium money is at. This is the real estate. If we're to go ahead and equate in a repeater site or location, or a tower site and location, you want to call it, what exactly is the part that you're paying for? Well, guess what? You're paying for tower and rack space. And let me tell you something. These sections on here, for some places, are buku bucks. Okay, that's how cellular companies make money. By allowing people to come in their towers. They rent this space. This is the real estate of there. Why is that important? Because, you can see that there's multiple channels in here. Tower sites are only limited by what the tower can hold, what the capacity can hold on there. So if a tower site has a lot of antennas on a tower, they may not be able to put as many repeaters or allow as many customers as they would like to on that tower site. And that's understandable, okay? That's totally 100% understandable. But what really it comes down to is where can you house it? Because not only do you need physical space up on the tower, you also need physical space in the ground. And that's where these racks come into play here. And there's numerous racks for numerous things. You have some racks which are going to actually go ahead and have the actual physical radio equipment that's in there. And I'm going to take a spin here real quick, kind of off camera here, but I'm going to show you real quick here. Then you also have racks that hold repeaters as well as batteries and charging systems on there. So that's really kind of where it all kind of comes down to. And as you can kind of see, there's some stuff under construction here, so that's why they said, hey, just understand that. But that's where it really comes into play of where can you keep and where can you maintain stuff that is on there. So once you have the layout of the rack, they usually go by what they call rack unit spaces. Sometimes you'll hear things called as 1Us and 2Us and 3Us and 4Us, and that is actually going to be is how much space each repeater is going to take up, okay, or what's mounted in the rack. Because these are all different base for stations and radios. These are power supplies here. This is an actual amplifier, because some repeaters only put out 50 watts, some put out 100 watts, some put out more. But if you need to bump that 50-watt repeater up, that's an amplifier. And then you see that there's also, on a screen here, you can't really see down here, but there's actually a base radio that's on here for a local municipality. It's a simplex base radio that they have on there, alrighty? But that's where it's going to come into play. So once you have determined where the rack space is, you're doing actually pretty good so far, because then now you need to figure out the antenna situation in here. Now, antenna situations are kind of unique, because you can have simple antennas. So I'll go ahead here and use what we call a duplexer. So this right up here is an actual UHF duplexer that is actually used for actually amateur purposes, believe it or not. But that is what we call a duplexer. So if you remember, what happens is that duplexer is basically a series of cans or filters which allow the transmit and receive antenna to be utilized on one antenna. So I'm going to go sneak back here, take a little bit of look at it. Yes, this is my amateur repeater, so one of many that I have on there. But as you notice, there actually is a transmit antenna port right here, and then there's actually a receive antenna port. So if we were to actually go and follow the antenna cable around, actually the UHF one is down here, so a transmit antenna here and a receive antenna here. So if we follow this antenna all the way around, we're going to go and see that it connects right into that duplexer right up here. This is where the receive antenna goes on this repeater. Now if we go back here to look at the transmit antenna actually is going to go into this amplifier here, and then out of the amplifier, it's going to go all the way up to here. Now notice on a duplexer you have a low frequency side, which will pass the low, and then we have a high frequency side, which passes the high. And what we mean by that is literally just that, the frequency. So in this case, this repeater here is 443750. So the transmit is 448750 from a handheld side. But remember, repeaters have to operate differently. They're in reverse. So what happens is that when your handheld or mobile transmit, if the repeater is going to receive on the high side, which is 448750 in this case, and then what's going to happen is it's going to come down in here, come down into the receive antenna, it's going to go through the repeater is then going to go ahead and repeat, and then it's going to send it out to the transmitter, and this is where this amplifier comes into play here. This repeater I only have set at about 20 watts. This takes it out nicely up to about 120 watts. So it goes in on the inside, which is low, so it says RF in on there. Then it comes out on the RF outside, and then as the RF outside, it goes in back up to the low frequency, because on a handheld you're receiving on 443.750, so that means the repeater must transmit on 443.750. Now as you see, there's interconnection cables from the low side and the high side. So you notice there's actually two cans or cavities, we'll call sometimes, that deal with the high frequency, and then there's on this one two that deal with the low frequency. They both get daisy chained up into this little coupler there, kind of trying to see through there, and then that coupler then connects to this, this is the single antenna that's going to go out to the actual antenna that I have, that I'm using for, getting back over here in field view here, that I'm actually going ahead and using for my antenna. So that's kind of the cool, interesting part of how this goes ahead and works for using a duplexer. Now, UHF is a lot smaller, okay? They can get smaller, it's just like the antennas. If you've ever seen a UHF antenna, so for example, UHF antenna like for, you know, a GMRS, FRS, those kind of things. Sometimes if it's a unity gain antenna, they're really small. Even if they're a high gain antenna, they're not as big as, let's say, VHF or low band or anything like that on there. So that's why that cavity is a little small. I know some people are going to ask those kind of questions on there. But let's talk about VHF. And I'm going to set my controls down here. And I'm going to show you an example of a VHF cavity. So this VHF cavity right here, this is a single cavity that's part of a repeatered system. So what this is going to happen here is this is what we're being called a notch cavity. Okay, so there's band pass, band reject, and there's notches. So what a band pass, band reject, which we kind of talked about, it will pass certain frequencies and it will reject certain frequencies. More so pass certain parts of the band and reject certain parts of the band. Where notch cavities or notch filtering will kind of do something as will specifically go out or tune out a frequency. Specific that might be causing an issue. So, as you can see, I had from that picture, I have a VHF as well as a UHF repeater at this site here. Well, guess what? I will tell you, this is VHF equipment, a mix of public safety and business equipment in this rack here. Do you think that public safety business frequencies are going to interfere with amateur frequencies? And the answer is yes. Lots of mixing can take place. Right here, right now, I will tell you that there is approximately 15 different repeater transmitters in this site alone. And they range from the VHF spectrum all the way up to the UHF spectrum. There's no 800 megahertz equipment, no 900 megahertz equipment, no low band equipment, but kind of do the math, thinking of it. Wow, if we have 15 repeaters or base stations here, now what we're going ahead and doing is we're having it set up that they're going to go ahead and there's going to be mixing. Because, and what is mixing? That's a good question. If you're wondering what mixing is actually when two signals, even two separate frequencies, key up and they're in the same area. What can happen is that because of those two frequencies are keying up at the same time, those two signals will go and they can create a harmonic or interference on another frequency. That's sometimes what is referred to as mixing. But how do we get over that? Do we mean that because of there's 15 repeaters, transmitters in the site here, that there's 15 antennas on here? No. And that's what this big thing is right behind me. This is what we call a combiner. So as I showed you that one single can that I just picked up a little bit ago, this one can here or these cans here are all tied together, and what they do then is they mix all the different frequencies together and filter all the frequencies together so that it allows you to have one or two antennas. Now, this is a very, very big important part to go and running a tower site, to management of the tower site, to let every transmitter play together and play nicely on the tower site. So what happens is that you have, and I'm going to kind of see, I'm going to point up to this box right up here if you can see it. That little box and setup up there is where all the receivers in these repeaters are coming into. And basically it's called a multicoupler. Okay? And what that multicoupler does is it says, okay, wait, we got these frequencies, I got the little filtering and the little notching and everything like that. So all these frequencies are going to come in, and what we're going to do is we're going to keep all these frequencies in a nice area, and we're going to send them out to the individual repeaters. Now, if you have frequencies that are in the same frequency range, multiplexers or like multi-combiners, multi-receivers, there's a couple different terms that people use in and out on there. So word police, please don't arrest me. But what it does is you can kind of group them together. So let's say, for example, at a commercial site here, we might have a bunch of things in the let's use the UHF thing. So let's say we might have a bunch in, let's say, the 455 to 460 region and a couple in the 465 to 470 region. Well, what you can do on a combiner is you can have everything sort of like in the 455 to 460 range, come into one receive antenna, which then easily will go out to all those, and then you have maybe another receive antenna, which will let all the ones that go from 465 to 470 kind of come in and go out to all those. That allows you to basically now only have to put one, maybe two, depending on your site, maybe three antennas for receive into multiple transmitters. Now, can you have one giant receive antenna for everything at the site? That's going to be 100% dependent upon your frequency. Because if you have UHF and VHF, you're probably going to have two. If you have simply all UHF, you should be able to do that okay. If you have all VHF, you see what I'm saying? So you can loop them together there. A lot is going to come down between the antenna, and a lot is also going to come down into the combiners. This is an expensive part of putting a repeater on the air. I don't care if you're doing it for amateur. I don't care if you're doing it for GMRS or business or anything else that a repeater might run on. This is where it costs the money. You can have duplexers that I showed you up there, that UHF one. It could easily start off to be the cost of the repeater, or maybe even more, depending. Because some duplexers can be 4 calendars, or four cavities or 4 cylinders. Some could be 6. Some could be small. Some can be big. But I will tell you what, how much money you put into a cavity system or setup is going to greatly impact how your radio, or I should say in this case the repeater, performs. So what happens is that we have this little multi-coupler up there for all the receives, but all of these cavities, and guess what? You see this is the top one up here, and it goes all the way down to the ground, and there's 2 rows of it. So as many there are on this side is as many as there are on that other side. And what's going to happen then is that you have to then connect on there. Now once again, the site is under construction, but let me give you a good solid look as to what I'm talking about here. Look at that. I'm going to back up here and see if we can get a good view. They got to tie up the wires a little bit, but look at that. All the way up at the top there to go all the way down to the bottom, you see all of those giant cans are just for the transmit alone. Yes, transmit alone. So when we're talking about radios, when we're talking about repeater sites and everything, we are going ahead and talking about some massive power out here too. So that all things in there, because if each station puts out 100 watts, these cavities have to be able to handle 100 watts. In essence, they're filters. And that's really probably the term that we should call them. We should call them filters. We shouldn't really call them cavities, because a cavity, the reason they call it is because that term kind of has come from when there's a device that deals with the frequency. Whether it filters out frequency or whether it passes frequency, that one can, for sake of a better term, is usually handling one frequency or maybe a couple if they're close together. That's why they call it a cavity, because if you were to take a look at how it looks on a scope, it goes and then dips down really low, and then it comes back up. And at the bottom of that dip, okay, is just where that frequency is at, and then idle frequency, and that's way quiet, way low on there. So that's why sometimes people will call it a cavity. But what is it? What exactly do these things do? Well, the transmits frequencies, or the transmitter frequencies of these repeaters at a site could be very close together. They could be far apart. They could have multiple different things. What these devices do is that through very technical studies, okay, and I mean technical studies. This isn't something I took pre-algebra or algebra 1 in high school, and now I'm going to go ahead and be able to calculate this. You have orders of mixing, as we talked about before. 3rd order, 5th order, intermod studies, everything like that. That, hey, if this frequency keys up, it's fine. If this frequency keys up, it's fine. But maybe when these two key up, it's going to cause interference to this one here. So that's what these giant cavities are doing. They're filtering out the frequencies of the other one so it does not cause interference. So that when these two key up, it doesn't wipe out this. And I know for some that might be watching this for the first time and are going ahead and saying, hey, wait a minute, that's kind of sound weird. Yeah, when that mixing occurs, may not all three are, let me back up. All 3 of these are separate frequencies, okay? They're not the same frequency. But once again, when this one and this one keys up, it might create a mix that's going to interfere with this one. And let's say this is an important channel. You don't want these 2 to key up, which are also important channels, and then the next thing you know is all of a sudden it's knocking out this channel. So you don't want that, and that's where these cavities come into play. And that's what they are, is they come into play, these cavities on here. So that is basically kind of a walkthrough on this. Once again, you have your rack, you have your repeaters in your rack, and then you basically then take your repeaters, and then they go ahead into the receiver and transmit ports on this combiner, and then the combiner actually has it go out. On this combiner, it happens to have the ability to only have to use 3 antennas. So we use 1 antenna for receive, and we use 2 separate antennas for transmit. The reason 2 separate antennas are being used for transmit on this one is largely based on the fact that if you put all of them onto 1 antenna, even with all this cavity and filtering, it's still going to cause an issue. It's still going to go ahead and cause a problem. Now, talking a little bit about more repeaters and stuff. What is the difference between a repeater and a base station? That was asked of me when we talked about the anatomy of a repeater and the physiology of a repeater. What is the difference between a repeater and a base station? Well, a base station is just like, per se, a mobile or a handheld, meaning you transmit or you receive. You cannot do both at the same time. A base station usually, though, will allow you to connect a microphone directly to it. It is a base, so usually either has a power supply with it or is connected to a power supply, and it has the ability usually to operate only 1 frequency and at higher power. A repeater is very similar, except that you'll notice no microphones are connected here. It has the ability to transmit and receive at the same time, and usually they are higher power. There are some repeaters which are low power. There are some repeaters which are, and when we say low power, usually like 25 or less watts. There are some which are what some would be called medium power, which is about 50 watts. And then there are some which are high power. Now, can you take a low power repeater and turn it into high power? Yeah, you can. And that usually comes into one of these things right here, which is known as the power amplifier, or sometimes it's called a PA on there, or an amp. There's a couple different things that you can, once again, that nomenclature that people interact on and on about. But then what that would do is that will take the 50 watts or 25 watts or 5 watts, whatever you have out of that repeater, and it takes it input here, and then it will kick it up to maybe 5 watts will go to 50, and 20 will go to 100, and 50 will go to 150, whatever the case may be. Multiple different setups out there based upon the band. Then, as we showed you on the other one, it's going to go out there, and then there you go. Boom. It's now going out to the repeater for that. So that's kind of an interesting part of that. That's what a difference between a repeater and a base is. Once again, then the antennas are going to go into the cavity. The cavities then take it down, take all these different frequencies. Because if you really think about it right here, just alone, there's a frequency for receive and a frequency for transmit. So if we were to count, it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 right here alone. And actually, I said 15 repeaters. So if we take 15 repeaters, that means there's 30 frequencies being used. 15 for receive and 15 for transmit. So you could see how we need to combine these antennas and put them all down on there. Now, this is a commercial, once again, for those watching me, for the crew that's over here, the monitor, for sake of a better term, thank you for letting me show this. Now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put it over to the amateur side. So let's take a look at what an amateur side is. Now the reason I'm having it take a look at the amateur side is because the amateur side is kind of unique in these kind of things. So at this site, I happen to be populating it with some Yaesu System Fusion repeaters. I have DMR repeaters, I have everything like that on there. But basically what's going to happen is that I wanted you to go show you this right here. So let me move around. Sorry, the camera's moving around a little bit here. I got to go ahead and get my GoPro up and running, right? But what this is a repeater controller. So what happens is that these are linked into here. So while a controller is usually within a repeater itself, what a external controller is it can either do what's normally built into a repeater, or in this case, you can go ahead and link things together. So in this case, the repeater up here can operate by itself. The repeater here can operate by itself. But what's going to end up happening is that when I need to link these two repeaters, I run it through a controller. So what would happen is that a signal would be received on this repeater here, show up as receive 1, and then over here, TX2 would key this repeater. Vice versa, if a signal is received here, it would show receive 2, and then it would go ahead and show TX1 down to this repeater here. That's how a controller works. So let's go ahead and take a look around the back of it to kind of give you a little bit more of an understanding of it also too here. So as you see on many repeaters, and I'll show you right here, they have an accessory port of some sort, whether it's a D sub 15, a 10-pin mini DIN, whatever the case may be. And what you do then is you build the interface cable, and then this goes into the controller right here. So as you see, port 1 and port 2. That is going to correspond to that 1, 2, 3, or 4 on that front display there. Now what you do then is this is going to have all those keying functionalities there. So there's going to be a pinout set here, and this isn't the exact order, but just to give you a reference, there's going to go ahead and have one. Let me point with my pen here a little bit easier. We'll try to zoom in here. But for an example, one of the ports is going to be for the receive audio, what they call receive or mic high. This is going to go, or excuse me, receiver speaker high. This is going to be for the receiver speaker low. One's going to be then for the mic high and the mic low, because remember, speakers and microphones, they have to have two wires going to it, right? Then you're going to have one that's going to give core sense. Then you're going to have one that's going to give PTT sense. Then you're going to have one that basically is going to be more functionality. So you're probably going to have a ground, and you're going to have some power wires on there. What does that all mean? Well, what that means is that when this device receives a signal, it's going to go ahead and receive that signal on the speaker. It's also going to receive a core sense. That core sense then is going to say, oh, based on how I'm programmed here, now what I need to do then is I need to say, okay, hey, going to go over to another port. That other port then, we'll pretend this one over here, that's going to give PTT out to the repeater, and then the mic audio is going to go ahead and come in there. And actually, you know what? Excuse me, I said that actually wrong. So the receiver repeater is going to actually have mic in and a core sense, and then the transmitting repeater is going to have speaker and a PTT. Sorry, I reversed it around there. But that's, you can kind of get the core concept, no pun intended, of how this controller works. And this is quite important because this is how linking takes place. If you're wondering, and guess what? Linking is not just about amateur repeaters. Linking can be actually commercial repeaters. So some of the commercial repeaters I have actually allow me to link between A and B in that case on there. So what happens is that I can take a repeater, and then I could have the conversation take place on, let's say, VHF or UHF or DMR, whatever, or whatever. Now, I'm not talking amateur now, just this is demonstration purposes only. I can have them take, and that one conversation could be on a different band in a different mode, come into a controller. That controller can then link them together, and then that linking would then go to that other repeater on there. So, just kind of some food for thought on here. Now, let's take a look at another key fundamental thing of a tower site, and this key fundamental thing of a tower site is going to be just this, which is what we call our power backup or battery backup. This is key to a site. Now, normally sites have a couple different things that take place. They normally have your normal outlets, so kind of like up there, as you see in the ceiling there, they have outlets around there, and then those outlets then provide the power to it. And then usually when you get into there, you see how there's a gray flexible conduit coming down. Well, that gray flexible conduit is so you don't have to plug things up into the air. You can actually go and plug them, excuse me, right into the power sources that are hanging down. So they come down into this, once again, rack space level that we have here. But then what you do is you have power sources on here, battery backup. Now, battery backup can be one or two things. Battery backups can be either used or designed to actually take and supply battery power if the AC commercial power goes down while it's down or while it switches over to a generator. This site is nice enough to actually have a generator switch. And then if you take a look over here, this is the generator switch, and this is actually the actual tower lighting system over there. So you see all these things here, if I can kind of get my finger in the camera, this is all the generation switch there and everything like that. There's the AC electrical panel for the electrical company, and then that over there, that Honeywell, that is actually the tower lighting thing on there. So getting back over to battery backup. Battery backup is very important because battery backup could be your own, or it could go ahead and be, you know, for long-lasting powers. You see, these are some deep cycle batteries on there. So they're designed to run for a while if the generator doesn't kick in and if commercial power goes out on there. Now, the last part I'm going to talk about is kind of somewhat of an important part, and it's this thing right here, the temperature control system on there. Nice thing about tower sites is that it's a nice building, it's a nice thing that's set up for you, and you need to keep it temperatures. You need to keep it up here in Wisconsin warm in the winter and also too cold in the summer. Well, the operating temperatures, let's call it that, of equipment can vary. I've seen some that they'll go down and work to like 40 or 50 degrees as a repeater, and I've seen others that will go up to easily 140 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm talking Fahrenheit now, not Celsius. But it's nice to keep your repeater sites at a sustainable temperature and a sustainable level on there. Usually, sometimes sites will go ahead and run on the upper 50s or the lower 60s in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, they'll go ahead and run in maybe the high 70s and 80s. You don't need to have it comfortable living temperatures for a person. You need to have it as manageable temperatures for the actual equipment itself. So a lot of people said, this and this and this and this. A lot of these sites that people try to get repeaters into are temperature controlled, and that's a good thing, and we want to try to do it on there too. So these other vents that you kind of see on there, those are actually the intake vents for just like a heating and cooling system that is on there. So it all plays into these parts here, and they have massive cooling systems. As a matter of fact, this is a cooling system for just this one rack over here, and this is the cooling system for the other rack over there. So I'm going to try not to get the people in view there, but as you see, the rack goes all the way behind me to the other side of the shelter. And I would say this shelter is at least a good 10 by 10, maybe a 12 by 12, but it's a full building here. As you can even see how thick the door is and stuff on there. Let's kind of show you here. I mean, it's a thick door that's on there. Oof, you can see the horrible Wisconsin weather. Now, one other thing, sometimes buildings actually have what they call demarcations. So they'll have telephone lines for alarm systems and stuff that actually come into the building too. So that's going to be really feature dependent upon what is taking place in there. Lots of people are moving away from landline systems. Some people are using the internet on there. So all those features do exist, and all those features can take place. So really it is dependent upon what the actual site and location has for you on there. Let me get back in view here. So yeah, so guess what? This is your virtual on the bench. And the reason I wanted to do this one is because, like I said, a lot of people don't realize that, radio systems are still in use. Lots of radio systems are still in use. Not just amateur, but business and public safety and GMRS and amateur and stuff. Lots of these things are in use. And there's a lot that go into these different sites on there. Now, obviously, the name of the game everybody wants to do is they want low cost for sites. They don't want to have to pay a lot of money. If you have a business repeater or a commercial repeater, or even an amateur repeater or a GMRS repeater, guess what? If you have to go ahead and put a lot of money into these sites for rent or upkeep or something like that, that really cuts into it. Especially when you're doing it for amateur, especially when you're doing it for GMRS. Now, if there's not money coming in, now you're paying money out. That's why sometimes with GMRS, you might find that if the repeater might be a closed GMRS repeater. And if that's the case, they may ask you for certain donations or something to help with it, because it costs money to be on a site. Same thing with amateur. Sometimes amateur radio operators, they may say, hey club, can you give me some money and stuff like that. Those people are not being arrogant in any way, shape, or form or anything like that. These sites do cost money. You can easily have charging costs in a site, you can have charging costs for your rack space. You can have charging costs for actually being either being on a duplexer combiner system or having your own antenna on there. Sometimes places will charge how many feet you were up on the tower. And those prices can range. I've seen anywhere from, the cheapest I've seen has been almost just about $1.75 all the way up to almost $10 a foot, depending on the tower and depending on what you're mounting on there and everything like that. So there's a lot of money that goes into people that self-support repeaters. Now, if I was to go ahead and do my, you know what really bends my antenna? That would be kind of this part here, but we're not doing that right now because it's hard to do that little graphic on there. Why am I saying that? Because if you use a repeater on a regular basis, if you use, whether GMRS, whether amateur, those kind of things, or maybe someone's allowing you free usage of their commercial repeater. Probably not. Usually they're charging people in there. But if you're using a GMRS or amateur repeater, find out maybe who the repeater owner is, find out who the club is, help them out. Electricity costs money. Keeping this equipment costs money. Those things kind of cost money. So if it's free to use, don't be afraid to say, hey, I would like to help support it. So that's this week's virtual On the Bench for Communications and Cigars. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you had a good time as well as I did. Until then, until the next episode, stay safe, enjoy your cigars, and 73.